Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Shifty's 49ers Talk. It's your boy Shifty coming at you with another episode. This one goes out to Niner fans, near, far, NFL fans, sports fans. Come on in, you're all welcome here. Today we are talking about my top 5 free agent targets who I think will be very realistic signings. So without further ado, let's get into it. So coming in at number 5, we have Desmond King, who has most recently played defensive back for the Houston Texans. Now, when you think about the Texans in 2021, they were not a good team at all, but Desmond King was actually one of the bright spots on that team. So he actually had 3 interceptions last season, also forced a fumble, has actually had years with multiple interceptions in previous years. Here's the thing, he's only 27 years old, so he's still very young, still has potential and room to get better. And I think if you put him in a defense like the 49ers, where we have an ability to get after the passer and force them to make mistakes, then Desmond King could thrive even more so. I think ideally he would be a guy that I'd like to replace K'Waun Williams with, should K'Waun Williams move on. I think King does really well in the slot. He can actually move around. He's very versatile, so should someone get hurt, he can really move around, play a little bit on the outside, the slot, even some safety. So that's another big reason why he would be someone that we might want to look at. I think ultimately he'd probably come in terms of a contract, maybe about $4 or $5 million a year, which would be an increase over what he made last year. Ultimately, though, the reason why he's number 5 is that I actually believe that we will bring back K'Waun. K'Waun, I'm a huge fan of. Makes plays, especially in the big games in the playoffs. He's someone who knows the system. He does really well in the system, is familiar with the entire team. So, but overall, should K'Waun move on, I'm a big fan of Desmond King. Coming in at number 4, we have Jayron Kearse, the safety from the Dallas Cowboys. Now, his most recent season in 2021, he played with the Cowboys under defensive coordinator Dan Quinn, and if we know anything, we know that Dan Quinn runs a defense that's quite similar to the cover 3 and the very predominantly zone coverage that we run here in San Francisco. Now, should we look to bring in a guy like Jayron Kearse, he would be a replacement for Jaquiski Tartt. Now, I'm a big fan of Tartt, and I believe I've had it in all of my mock off seasons that I want to bring him back, at least on a 1-year deal. However, should we look to move on, I think Kearse is a really solid option. Kearse is still 28 years old, so still relatively young. He actually has made some plays, though, in terms of like turnovers, which is something that Jaquiski Tartt has really struggled with. We don't really need to rehash the whole NFC Championship debacle of the dropped interception, but even beyond that, Tartt is not someone who necessarily forces many turnovers, which is something that we could really use in our secondary. Jayron Kearse last year, 2 interceptions, a fumble recovered, and then he also had a sack too, so some really nice plays that he made in 2021. Now, he's a guy, though, who I actually think would come in quite a bit more expensive than Jaquiski Tartt. So that's the one thing that's going to push him down a little bit in terms of this list. I'm thinking he'd probably be similar money to Desmond King, maybe $5 or $6 million. Now, my preference would be bring back Jaquiski Tartt on maybe like a $2.5-3 million deal. Then you draft a safety maybe in the 2nd or 3rd round. Overall, you'd be paying less with those 2 guys than you would a Jayron Kearse, and I think ultimately you could get more production that way. But should Tartt move on, and maybe if there aren't any safeties, you just never know how the draft will work out, then I think Jayron Kearse is a really solid option in free agency, and we won't have to break the bank necessarily to get him. Coming in at number 3 on my list is going to be Robert Tonyan, the tight end from the Green Bay Packers. So people will probably be pretty surprised to see a tight end on this list, considering we have the best tight end in the league in George Kittle. Well, here's my rationale for bringing in a guy like Big Bob Tonyan. Couple things. He's only 28 years old, so he's still pretty young. He had 11 touchdowns in 2020. 580 yards, about 50 catches with Green Bay. He is the kind of guy where in an offense where when he's not the focal point, he can put up big numbers. I think when you look at the San Francisco offense, the defense are going to be focusing on Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, and then you have guys like Elijah Mitchell. You have Kyle Juszczyk to worry about. If we can have an effective second tight end in Tonyan, that could really be another wrinkle to this offense where defenders are just going to have so many guys to cover that they won't even know what to do. I think bringing a guy like Tonyan could make our red zone offense and third down efficiency even better. I believe in red zone offense in terms of efficiency scoring touchdowns, we were number 1 in the NFL last year. If we could make that even better, wow, how much of an advantage would that be? But Tonyan, I think he will not be back in Green Bay. If you look at Green Bay, they are, I think, negative $50 million in cap space. They got a whole bunch of stuff to work out. They're going to want to bring back Devontae Adams, who's going to make crazy money. So I think Tonyan is going to be one of those guys who's going to be an odd man out in Green Bay, and I think it could really benefit the 49ers. We run a very similar offense to Green Bay, but they have Matt LaFleur there, who's from that Shanahan coaching tree, so I think it'd be a relatively seamless transition. Maybe he comes in for a year, puts up some big touchdown numbers, and then moves on in 2023, gets a big contract somewhere else. But number 3 on the list, Robert Tonyan. I think we get him for about $3 or $4 million. If we can do that, I say make it happen. And coming in at number 2 on this list, we have another Green Bay Packer. This time it's going to be wide receiver Marquez ValdesSchuster, MVS for short. He is a guy who I think, similar to a Big Bob Tonyan, would actually add another dimension to this offense even furthermore, and I think he'd come at a very reasonable price. Let's talk a little bit about MVS. He's 27 years old. In his career, he averages 17.5 yards per catch. That is insane. This guy is 6'4". Some sites even say 6'5". He is a speed guy. He's something that we're really, really lacking on this offense. Love Debo, love Ayuk, love Jawan, love Kittle, and these guys are relatively fast. But man, if we can have that speedster who can just basically go deep, it forces the defense to have to play their safeties a little bit deeper, so it opens up things underneath a little bit more for Kittle and Ayuk and Debo to break tackles to get those yak yards. So I think MVS could come in on a relatively cheap deal, maybe around a $3 million mark. Give us that speed threat. He's a tall guy as well, so maybe also helps out in the red zone. But I really, really just like his game. He's very consistent. That's the one thing which I'll say about his career. Every single year in Green Bay so far, in 4 years, he's basically put up anywhere from 400 to 600 yards, and I think that could be a very reasonable expectation for MVS coming here. Maybe, and again, like Tonyan, he's going to be very familiar with the type of offense that we run here. And then again, similar to, I think he's basically like a Marquise Goodwin, maybe not as fast as Marquise Goodwin, but he's a guy who can go deep, but he's a lot bigger too, so he can be physical as well. But yeah, number 2 on my list, it's MVS. I think he'd be a great addition to the wide receiver core. Alrighty, and it is time for my number 1 free agent signing, realistic free agent signing that I would want to bring in this offseason. And we're going to be sticking with a theme similar to the last 2 guys. They're not coming from Green Bay, but I have Cordarrelle Patterson, the wide receiver, who last season played for the Atlanta Falcons. This guy, man, what a weapon he was in Atlanta offseason. Think of him as Deebo Samuel light. Now, we all love Deebo here in 49er land. Imagine having basically almost another version of Debo on the offense. Could you imagine the plays that Kyle Shanahan would dream of coming up with Debo, with Cordarrelle Patterson, with Kittle, with Ayuk? Just defenses wouldn't know what to do. So the theme here that we're sticking with the last couple of guys is bringing another dimension to the offense, bringing versatility to this offense. Last season, Cordarrelle Patterson had over 1,100 all-purpose yards, receiving and rushing yards, and had 11 touchdowns on a team that didn't have much weapons, and people knew that he was going to be the focus. Now, if you could put Cordarrelle Patterson somewhere, he's like the priority number 3 or 4 or 5 for a defense, he can still make those plays, and I can only imagine what Kyle Shanahan would come up with having a guy like Patterson on the team. Now, compared to the other guys on this list, he's a little bit older. He's 31, but I think perhaps at this stage of his career, he might want to go to a team that has a shot at winning the Super Bowl. I think this 49ers team, assuming we can bring back a lot of our other players, is a team that should compete for the Super Bowl next year, especially if Trey Lance can come along in his development like we think he can. But adding in Cordarrelle Patterson would be awesome, not only offensively, but this guy is a guy who would actually have ranked top 10 in average for kick return yardage had he had enough average kick returns to be in that statistic. But he had about maybe 10 or 15 returns last season, averaged about 24 yards, so would also be a weapon in that case. In his career, he's had multiple kick returns for touchdowns, so a weapon in the special teams, but of course offensively. Man, that would be exciting. I think he will cost definitely more than a guy like MVS, my previous prospect, but I'm thinking maybe $4 to $6 million. Maybe he's one of our high-priced free agents. Cordarrelle Patterson would be an awesome addition to this team. Alrighty guys, so that is my list of my top 5 realistic free agent signings of guys that I would like to bring in this offseason. Of course, I want to hear what you guys think of my list. Who are some guys that you think that we could bring in on a reasonable contract? Let's not forget that, of course, even with trading Jimmy Garoppolo, we're not going to have a ton of money to spend, especially when you factor in we want to give Debo an extension, Bosa an extension. We want to bring back key guys probably like Laken Tomlinson and DJ Jones and Arden Key. So that's where my focus was on guys who I think will be reasonably priced. A couple of guys here. Of course, I don't think we will or could bring in all of the guys on the list, but these are just some guys that came to mind who I think would fit in really well with what we need to move forward and to possibly go on to win number 6. But as always, guys, thank you so much for stopping by. I appreciate and see all the new subscribers and, of course, all the people who've been here from the beginning. Love and appreciate you all. And yeah, there's going to be more videos coming out soon. But at this point, guys, I'm going to say 2 things. The butt counts, and I'm going to catch y'all on the flip side.